everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown, and this is Dear Profiler Pat, where you send me your questions and ask for my advice, and I give some, and I hope that it helps you, and I hope it helps the other people viewing the channel. If you would like me to answer one of your questions, please send it to profilerpatbrown@gmail.com, and please subscribe to the channel and check the playlist and all that stuff. All right. This question, Dear Profiler Pat, what do I do if my profession clashes with my values? This is a tricky question to answer. And the lovely person who wrote it to me said, if you don't want to answer this question on Dear Profiler Pat, I understand. And she says here, I know you prefer to avoid political discussions. So I understand not wanting to even put this kind of potential bait out there. And she's quite correct. This is a time when I do avoid as much as possible ever discussing politics on either one of my channels. I don't like doing it because people lose their damn minds and can't be cordial. And the world has changed, and where you used to be able to talk about things and disagree and have a drink and laugh, and like Patrick Swayze said, hey, opinions vary, and walk away. That's not the world we live in. So I thought long and hard about whether I want to answer this question. But I decided to, because I do think it is a very difficult situation for a lot of people these days. And we have to decide how we're going to handle it, because it creeps into a whole lot of everything. It really does. It does. It creeps in. And even on my own channels, I will not say the words unalive and SA, and I won't even say what they're for, because I want this show not to be demonetized. But I do say it, when I do most of my profiling case shows, I will not say those words. Actually, I'll say the real words. And most of the time I'm not demonetized, but people keep warning me, don't do that, Pat, because it's so sensitive now. You have to say it this way. And I'm like, I'm not going to. I'm not playing that game. But I've made that choice, and I may have to pay for that choice. So this is the problem when you're working in a profession. As the ideas of a society change, whether it be political, whether it be social, whether it be cultural, as things change, you get caught up in the changes. And you either can, you're comfortable with the changes and you can go with it, or you're finding yourself having issues with the changes, and therefore you don't know how you're supposed to deal with it, because you're doing the same thing you've always done, but the changes around you are causing difficulties, and it may even throw you out of your profession if you refuse to cooperate, shall we say. So let me read you part of what the letter writer is saying. She says that she's a licensed therapist, and I operate a part-time telehealth private practice. I don't work with insurance companies, so I'm private pay, hence my smaller caseload. Over the years, I've been finding that my field is growing more and more, all kinds of new stuff happening, and very political. It's reaching a point where if I don't validate a client's ever-changing identity or outright denounce a specific political party, I risk being reported to the board for ethical violations. It's getting worse. The current stance among other clinicians is that, quote, therapy is political because people's lives depend on it. So in other words, when you're in a situation where you're giving advice like here, you have to accept that the political arena that we live in, what's happening today in politics, is a source of a problem for people. And therefore, you're supposed to be able to acknowledge that this stuff is perhaps wrong, as opposed to this stuff exists, but perhaps it's your way of dealing with it that's the problem, which would be the correct way, in my opinion, that a clinician should look at this. That regardless of what political party you're affiliated with or what your beliefs are, if you come into me and you say, I'm so stressed out because of A, B, C, and D, because of what's happening politically around them, I would say, hey, let's take a look at how it's affecting you, and not discuss the actual politics, but look at how it affects you. That should be enough. But apparently it is not. So that's, and then she says, it's normal nowadays for clients to outright ask, who did you vote for during the first few sessions? And if you take the classical approach of non-self-disclosure, which should be appropriate for both a teacher, a clinician, and anybody else working in certain fields, that you should not have to or should not, period, talk about politics or your own political viewpoints. Somehow these days, you have to declare your political viewpoint so that person can determine whether they should have anything to do with you or not. And so if you say I'm not going to discuss it, they assume you're the opposing side, whatever the opposing side is. Okay. Now, and I can relate to this because when I worked as a sign language interpreter, which I did for 13 years of my life prior to profiling, there were times when people said they wanted to know. They'd sit and look at me and they would say, who did you vote? Sorry, I have trouble translating in English. Basically, who did you vote for? Okay, so then I would say, no, I don't discuss politics. No, not when I'm working. And some of them were like, oh, that's cool. And some of them did go, you must have voted for the person I didn't like, but in sign language. And it was like, it's an inappropriate question to even ask anybody. I wouldn't go into my doctor and say, hey, doc, who'd you vote for? I don't care who my doc voted for. I want to know if he can practice medicine properly. That's all I care about. If I go to a psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist of any sort, I don't care who they voted for. What I want to know is, can they help me handle what I'm trying to handle? Can they relate to that? I would probably be more concerned, for example, that if I went to a therapist, that the therapist not be 20 years old, because I don't think she would understand my whole life experience and where I'm at as an older person. I would want somebody who says, hey, I know what you're talking, you're hitting 70. Gotcha. But that's what some people think about politics. If you don't believe in my politics, I can't come to you. And that's become very, very big issue recently. So that's really tough when you're working in a situation where people are very affected in their own minds, at least, about politics, and then they want to have you confirm that they have every reason to be upset about the politics, not how it's affecting. So there's two different things. The politics are the politics, but how it affects you and how you believe it affects you is something different. The next thing she said about this is, further, I'm finding that my beliefs about health and healing no longer align with what's becoming commonplace in our culture. And this you're pointing out the issue about culture. Culture changes over the years. The older people often think younger people are culturally like, what's wrong with you? Every generation thinks the younger generation is nuts, right? And of course, when you have a mixture of cultures, people come from other countries, they also add their specific culture in. And interesting enough, sometimes those people are, actually may not agree with American cultures in two different ways. One is that they might think American culture is far too lenient and they're more conservative. Some of them may think Americans are too conservative and want to be more lenient. See, so even people from other cultures, depending on what culture they come from, may have differing viewpoints on all of this stuff. But culture changes, subcultures change. And depending on where you live, you might be dealing with whomever is in that culture. Now, also, just to understand, once upon a time, when you were born in a town, you were born in it, you grew up in it, went to school in it, you married in it, you worked in it, you died in it. That group probably had very similar culture, very similar religious and political beliefs. But when people move all over the place, all over the country, thousands of miles away, and they go into different areas with different ideas, and they meet different kinds of people, all kinds of stuff changes in the heads of people. Culture changes radically, people's viewpoints on things. So if you're in a specific town, you can't say, well, everybody in this town probably thinks like me. Especially if you're in a metropolitan area, you can pretty much be assured everybody thinks a whole lot differently from you a good portion of the time. But what do you do about that? So she says she's had issues, things becoming more commonplace in the culture. Polyamory, kinks, promiscuity as freedom, immediate divorce, gender ideology, etc. And she said, well, I might have been open-minded a few more years ago. I didn't have kids, but now I've had kids. When you get older, you get more conservative. That's what she's basically saying. There's a lot more fear in your thinking when you're teen or 20s. You're like, oh, whatever. And you have kids, and you're like, I want my kids to be protected. That's kind of a normal thing. The catch for me is to make that I make decent money and have a modest yet established caseload. I've considered leaving the field altogether. My other idea is to simply rebrand myself so that my approach is more obvious from the get-go. The issue is with the latter, however, is that my current clients might feel betrayed, like, well, you've been fooling me all this time. um, she says, all of this is an oversimplified example of my internal dilemma. So it's kind of funny because in reality, this is what people come to this particular letter writer for, their internal dilemma. And now the letter writer has an internal dilemma herself, which is all of us. We all have internal dilemmas. The problem is what's happening on the outside giving us the internal dilemma in our own minds only? Because I've seen people get really bent out of shape about stuff. And I'm like, I don't even think it affects you. You're going crazy about something. I don't think that even, you either because you make so much money, it doesn't affect you, or because the location you live in, it doesn't affect you. I'm like, why are you going so crazy about something that doesn't affect you? On the other hand, you might have an internal dilemma because indeed the outside world is affecting you. And now you can't do things that you would like to do because you're in a quandary, because your belief system doesn't match with the belief system of the profession that you're in. And I can give some simple examples of that, and how you might have to deal with it, unfortunately. When I was a sign language interpreter, there was definitely one thing I said, I don't think I can interpret for, and that was abortions. I wasn't making a political commentary on abortions. I didn't want to be there when it happened. It just, to me, I personally do think a baby is a baby, you know what I mean? That's just me. But the thought of standing there and interpreting, going, okay, now we're going to go inside, we're going to chop the, no, it just was, I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't deal with it. So I specifically said to the company, do not send me to abortions. I do not want to interpret for them. Send somebody else who that doesn't bother them. And so I don't want to do it. Also, I didn't want to. The one thing you want to make sure you don't do is when you have a particular opinion. For example, let's say I was sitting with somebody outside in the waiting room, and they would say, "I'm thinking about, maybe I'm going to get an abortion." Not my place. I'm an interpreter. It's not my place. And it's also a violation of the code of ethics for me to give my opinions, to give her a lecture, to say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. No, it's not my place. I simply would say, would either say nothing, or if she goes into, what do you think? I go, I don't discuss that. Again, just like politics, I don't discuss that because it's not right to do so. And but I also have the right not to want to interpret for one if it bothers me that much, and it does. So I never did. I also didn't want to interpret for children, and that was because a lot of times I wasn't too fond of what they were telling the parents to do to the children, and I'm not I didn't like to see children get stabbed all the time, because almost every time a child goes in, especially the babies and all that, they get stabbed. And I couldn't stand watching it. I was like, it just, I didn't enjoy it. So I'm like, no, I don't know. Send me down to the gunshot victim in the ER, So, I did mostly ER work. And but I didn't like going to those appointments when I had to watch kids cry, because, I couldn't stand doing it. So I chose not to. Now, I was also in my lifetime a La Leche League leader. I taught breastfeeding to women, how to breastfeed, how to be successful at it. I had meetings at my house for breastfeeding women when they all sat there and breastfed their babies and all that stuff. And I did that for 7 years or something like that. And then now when I look at it, now there's this new rule now. You can't become a La Leche League leader anymore if you don't believe in chest feeding, because they say breastfeeding / chest feeding. So they are now helping people who would like to chest feed, clearly not biological females at birth, to do this methodology, and also be in the groups with the other women, and also to be a La Leche League leader, even as a chest feeder as opposed to a breastfeeder. All right. I said, I don't want to get political stuff here, but It don't work for me. I would not be comfortable with that. I would no longer ever be allowed to be a La Leche League leader. So there's a lot of pediatricians these days running into issues over gender affirming care. Some pediatricians are 100% for gender affirming care, and others think it is child abuse. And when a woman comes in with a 3-year-old and says, "This is my son," and he identifies as a girl, some pediatricians think that is Munchausen syndrome by proxy and would like to report that woman to the authorities. But other pediatricians would think that's perfectly fine and want to help her. And as time goes on, help with hormones and help with surgeries and everything else. They have no problem with it. Now, if you are a pediatrician these days, you are in a quandary because there is one group of pediatric group, which is not in favor of gender affirming care, but I would say the majority are. And so if you're working for example, Kaiser Permanente, which I do believe supports gender affirming care, and you're a pediatrician, what do you do? If you think that the woman coming in with that 3-year-old saying that, you think she's maybe psychopathic and she's doing harm to her child. That's child abuse. That's what you believe. You cannot be there giving gender affirming care when you don't believe in gender affirming care. So you would have to legitimately, if the organization supports something you believe is wrong, you will have to walk away from that organization. Hopefully find another organization. Some people leave a country to find a place that they can work where they feel comfortable. And this kind of thing has been going on for, years. For example, for Catholic hospitals that did not want to do abortions, for example, we're against that, so we're not going to do that. There's been issues with obviously the issues with marriage. Same-sex marriage has been an issue in certain religions, and people who believe in certain religions, like the baker who didn't want to make a cake with 2 males on it, 2 females on it, the wedding cake, and he got nailed for it. People have belief systems, whether it's religious or whether it's societal or whatever it is. And we can't deny that people have the right to have belief systems. Just because they're not our belief system doesn't mean they don't exist in other people's heads. The problem is when they clash. And there are reasons to, if you believe in something strongly and that person believes in something strongly, there are forums to fight these things out. And there are political forums, there's social forums. I mean, there's all kinds of places where you can work to try to institute your particular belief. Whether I think it's right or wrong, you have that ability to do so. You have places where you can go and say, hey, this is what I believe, and you can get people together. That's how societies change, and that's how societies change laws. And that's how then sometimes when laws are changed, there's parts of society who don't like what just happened, and then they fight against it, and sometimes the laws get retracted. That's the way things work in this world. And as individuals, we have to decide what we're comfortable with and what we're not comfortable with, and understand that sometimes we're going to take the hit if we are going up against, if we're in a profession where we're the odd man out or the odd woman out, we're going to probably get screwed. And some people don't have a very strong opinion, so they'll just go with the flow. And they're like, it doesn't bother me very much, so I'm good. Even if they don't necessarily agree, it's like, I like making money, I want to do it, whatever. So I'm good, I'll keep doing it. Every profession has that. Every profession probably has something that people aren't too happy doing. And they have to decide whether it's past the point of, I really can't do that. Or whether it's just something you don't like doing, but you can suffer through it or, stomach it or whatever. But then there's that point where you just can't do it. And then you have to make your decision as to how you're going to handle that. And that sometimes is even true in family life, of what you will accept and what you will not accept as behaviors within your family, who you want to be around. Now, what's really sad today is, again, people will say, well, I won't be around my parents anymore because they voted for somebody I didn't like. So I'm just going to, excommunicate my parents. I'm never going to talk to them again. That's pretty horrendous. I mean, that's sad, because And I'm in a family that went number of different directions in voting, and we get along fine. And we have friends who have different, different political views. We get together and have a great time. And one of the reasons we do is either one of two things happens. This is true for work too. Either you can say like Patrick Swayze, opinions vary, and because they vary, we can laugh about it and joke about it and not get mad about it. We can actually talk about it and it won't like screw our brains up. Or we have to say, hey, it's Thanksgiving. Let's no politics. It's Thanksgiving, no politics. And because I want to have I want to think about family. I want to think about beautiful things. I want to share. I don't want to get in an argument about some political crap. I don't want to do that. So there are times when you can say, let's just not discuss that, even just with a family. Let's say your parents believe in something you don't believe in. You go over there and they start talking. You go, oh, let's not talk about that. It upsets me. And I don't want to be upset with you. So let's just not talk about that. And if they can't control themselves, you go, okay, well, maybe I'll come back another day, and you leave, but you don't excommunicate them. You don't say, I'm never going to talk to you again. Just leave. And when they go, why did you leave? Well, I told you I didn't want to talk about that. So next time I come, can we not talk about that? Whatever it may be. So there are things that there are times to talk about things and there are times not to talk about things. And certainly on the job, I think we shouldn't be talking about politics on the job. We shouldn't be, period. But there are definitely issues, and one runs into that one with psychology, for example. When a person says, I'm having difficulties because, and then they're like, let's say they're talking about, having more than one partner. Let's say they're in one of these, let's say they've got their boyfriend their husband just decided they wanted to bring an extra girl in, so there'll be two of you women and him, and you're like, I'm trying to go along with it and da 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 da, and you're sitting there going, oh my God, that guy has no respect for you. It's ridiculous. That's not what marriage is about, and that's what you're thinking. And then you say to them, so the question is, how do you approach that? And not trash. If they believe that's okay to have an open marriage like that, or what is it, polyamory? I forgot what it's called. And they think it's okay, or wife swapping. They're going to wife swapping stuff, and and going to orgies and crap. And you're thinking this is kind of horrible behavior and is not mentally healthy for you or your relationship. But they believe it's perfectly fine. There's no reason why people can't do that. If they want to have sex that way, it's their preference, and blah 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 blah. And you're trying to talk to them and they're getting angry because you're trying to discuss this with them. So the problem comes down to, how do you discuss something that you disagree with that they don't disagree with? So as I point out, the best you can do is see how it is, work on how it's affecting them. You don't have to actually say, God, your orgy stuff is really creepy. Are you hanging out with Diddy? What? It's not good. No freak offs. So don't go to freak offs. You're thinking it's creepy as hell, and it's not healthy physically or emotionally. But they're going, it's okay. It's like that's an acceptable thing. You go, okay, let's talk about it. You feel it's acceptable, so okay, we'll go with that. You believe that people should have a right to different kinds of sexual experiences. How is this affecting you? That's what I want to know. Not whether I agree. I don't have, neither one we don't have to talk about whether it's right or wrong, but how is it affecting you? Is when you're going to do these things, does it make you happy? Does it make you feel special? Are your relationship with your husband when you're doing these things? Why do you think your husband is wanting you to do these things? And what does it make you feel like that your husband wants you to do these things, et cetera, et cetera? So there are ways to talk to people about things to some extent, as far as how it is affecting them. Same thing you do with politics. So you're worried about, or I don't know, you can pick any political thing. You say, you're really worried about this. How is that affecting you personally? How is that making a difference? And then if they can't come up with one where it's personally affecting them, and they say, but it's mentally affecting me, I think it's just wrong. Okay. Have you found a way to express that in a positive way? In other words, are you doing something, let's say, some kind of charitable work that would make you feel better about the situation that you're concerned about? some legal charitable work. I mean, there are lots of legal charitable works you can do in where people might disagree with some people. There might be that disagreement over the big issue, but there's still charitable things you can do within that issue, uh, just to do nice and kind things. So one can find ways to talk about it and help them, but for I wouldn't say for the most part, in some ways. Now, there are some things which, if you totally disagree with, and you're talking to somebody and you're saying, this person says, I have gender dysphoria. I don't feel like a female. I want to be a male. And you don't believe that you believe it is gender dysphoria, and you don't believe that uh, becoming trans is going to be it's a good solution, and that offends their political ideology or their whatever ideology they have. They're like, well, I only want to talk to a person who believes in trans stuff. Well, then you would say, I'm probably not the right person for you to talk to about it then. So perhaps you might find somebody who is more inclined towards your way of thinking. That's all you could possibly say, because you care about the person, but you also think, in your opinion as a therapist, that they're suffering from emotional issues, psychological problems, and that they don't need to change sexes to solve them. And you will think that changing sexes or attempting to present as another sex is not going to be necessarily beneficial to them in the long run. Then you're going to have to be able to, you would have to be honest about that and then say, either I can help you try to understand yourself and why you feel this need, or you might have to find somebody else. Even if you think that them finding somebody else is not healthy for them, if they're not going to be comfortable with you, they're not going to be comfortable with you. And will that change, your interaction with something? Sure. You might not be able to be part of that any longer. So you just have to walk away. And sometimes you lose money. There are police officers who, have quit because maybe they weren't happy with society's view of them, or maybe the police department's requirements of them. My daughter's been police work for 20 years. I've done a lot of police departments, and I've seen some people who get very despondent over trying to do their jobs. And because of all kinds of political issues, they've had difficulties, and it comes from both sides, by the way. So, but what do? They either keep going, or they say, "Yeah, I've had enough." Teachers are struggling with this as well. Teachers who are having trouble with what's being taught in school, or teachers who are having problems with the violence in the school. All kinds of reasons teachers are having issues. And again, not necessarily one political viewpoint or the other. They're just having tough times in the school system, depending on where they live in the country. It could be different for everywhere in the country that they're in. So sometimes they might have to say, I have to choose a different profession. And it really sucks when you've worked hard to be in that profession, and the profession is not something that you mesh with properly any longer. So then you have to leave that profession. Or in your case, I think you're talking about, do I just be up front? Well, if you're getting to the point where you're going to have to say something in order to be able to bring in clients without feeling like you're deceiving them, because they're going to think you're a different kind of person than you are, a different kind of therapist than you are, you're going to have to be up front. And are the ones who've been with you going to be a little annoyed? Well, they might leave. You changed your methodology to some extent, or going to be more whatever, and they're like, yeah, I'm done with you. They may, but of course you can present this in a way, I think, that you can simply say, present it in a way that is not offensive, and leaves room for caring for people and showing that you still love them, and but you find that your approach to therapy is going to be in this form. And then you hold your breath and hope it all goes well, because it is very tricky. It is very tricky. And so it's tough. There's things in my profession, in sign language interpreting, for example. I love sign language interpreting, and I've always thought I might like to go back and do some more part-time, because I just enjoy being in the deaf community. And my problem is that I sign a BASL, which is Black American Sign Language. And right now, they are pushing only Black interpreters for Black clients. And I'm like, for all my clients, for the last, all the years I've ever worked, 95% have been African American, you know? So I'm like, and I sign Black American Sign Language is just kind of like, it is just what after I started working in the community, that's what my sign language became. That's the sign language I know. And all of a sudden I can't go work in the community that I'm comfortable in. The community is comfortable with me. I'm comfortable with them. Why can't I go there? And now there's this new rule. It's basically a political thing that we're trying to make, have the Black client be comfortable with somebody who signs their sign language, which I do, but and also understands their culture, safe space kind of thing. And yet it's kind of funny because they're sending many of the Black interpreters don't know Black American Sign Language. They sign American Sign Language, which is the bigger known sign language, American Sign Language. They know American Sign Language. They don't know Black American Sign Language, BASL. They don't know. They go down there, go to work with that client. They're like, I don't even understand what she's saying. and just because you're one race, one color of skin doesn't mean you have the same culture. I mean, I've always found that funny because, there are many people who are in different colors who in one culture and so it's all silliness, some of it, So of course I have two biracial kids and I have one Black son. So my kids, they aren't of a particular culture, and somebody sent them because we're going to send this person so they understand you. How would they know what my kids are comfortable with? Because they've grown up in a very, very multicultural setting. So I mean but that's a political thing that has popped up recently in the community, and I would no longer be able to interpret for the people that I've always been comfortable interpreting for, that I actually match, even if the skin color doesn't. So I'm probably pretty much chucked out of that that profession. It's really sad. So things like that happen in every profession. Things change over time, and we just sometimes have to figure out where we're going to go from there, or how we're going to adjust. Sometimes we just have to adjust, and maybe the adjustment will cost us, 1/3 of our salary. But then again, there's people who don't have a salary at all. So I guess we'll just consider ourselves lucky that we can still survive. If we can still survive, and if we like what we're doing and we're more comfortable with what we're doing, I think that's important. So that's my thoughts on this. And again, if you're going to comment below, please be polite. No political comments, no religious comments. No, just don't put those comments out there. They're unnecessary. Even though I say opinions do vary, and I don't have problems with them, I really prefer not to have them discussed here like that, because people can't seem to be nice to each other these days on YouTube. It's quite a pit these days. So just I'll do my best to block those comments if I see them. So because I don't want that kind of negativity. So be polite, be friendly, and I'll see you next time, and send me your questions. Bye.